Sarah's eyes opened slowly, squinting against the unfamiliar sunlight streaming through windows that weren't hers. The room smelled like expensive cologne and fresh coffee, a stark contrast to her usual morning routine of instant caffeine and the lingering scent of hospital disinfectant that seemed permanently embedded in her scrubs. She turned her head carefully, noting the high thread count sheets beneath her fingers and the modern artwork hanging on walls painted in a sophisticated shade of gray that probably had some fancy name like Urban Mist or Metropolitan Dawn. The events of the previous evening came flooding back in fragments. Jessica's birthday party at that upscale downtown restaurant. The group of medical residents celebrating another year of surviving their demanding schedules. The handsome stranger at the bar who had caught her attention when he quietly paid for an elderly couple's dinner without them knowing. His easy smile when she approached him, curious about his random act of kindness. "You're awake," came a warm voice from the doorway. Sarah pulled the sheet up to her chin and turned to see him standing there, fully dressed in dark jeans and a crisp white button-down shirt, holding two steaming mugs. David, she remembered now. Dr. David Chun, though she hadn't known his profession at the time. He had simply introduced himself as someone who worked in medicine, and she had assumed he was another resident like herself. "Coffee," he offered, his smile gentle and free of the awkwardness she had expected. "I wasn't sure how you liked it, so I made it black. There's cream and sugar on the nightstand." Sarah sat up carefully, grateful that she had apparently had the foresight to put her bra back on at some point during the night. She accepted the mug with both hands, inhaling the rich aroma. It was clearly expensive coffee, the kind she couldn't afford on her residence salary, but occasionally treated herself to when she needed to feel human again after a particularly brutal shift. "Thank you," she said, her voice still husky from sleep. "This is really good." "It should be. I may have developed a slight addiction to good coffee during my fellowship years. When you're living on 3 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline, quality caffeine becomes a survival tool." Sarah studied his face over the rim of her mug. In the soft morning light, she could see the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours and intense concentration. His dark hair was slightly mussed, and there was something about the way he moved that suggested controlled energy, like a runner conserving strength for a marathon. "Fellowship," she repeated. "So you're a doctor." "Guilty as charged." He settled into the chair beside his bed, maintaining a respectful distance while still being close enough for conversation. "And you mentioned last night that you're finishing up your nursing residency. How much longer do you have?" 3 more months, Sarah said, then found herself adding, "if I don't mess anything up spectacularly before then." She wasn't sure why she was being so honest with this man she barely knew, but something about his presence felt safe and non-judgmental. "You won't mess up," he said with quiet confidence. "From what you told me about your work yesterday, you care too much about your patients to let that happen. That kind of dedication doesn't lead to spectacular failures." Sarah felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. She remembered talking to him about Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who had been struggling with post-surgical depression, and how Sarah had spent extra time each shift just sitting with her and listening to stories about her grandchildren. Most people outside of medicine didn't understand why those moments mattered, but David had listened with genuine interest. "You're being very kind to someone who probably overshared about work on what should have been a fun night out," she said, attempting to inject some lightness into her tone. "I asked because I was interested," David replied simply. "It's rare to meet someone who talks about their work with such genuine passion. Most people in our field either burn out or become cynical. You seem to have found a way to stay connected to why you started." Sarah felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with last night's attraction and everything to do with being truly seen by another person. She had spent so many dates listening to men complain about their jobs or brag about their achievements, but David seemed genuinely curious about her perspective and experiences. "What about you?" she asked. "What's your specialty?" "Surgery," he said, then paused as if considering how much to reveal. "I start a new position on Monday, actually. A bit nervous about it, to be honest." "New job jitters are normal," Sarah said, settling back against the headboard and tucking her legs under the sheet. "Where will you be working?" "St. Mary's Medical Center." Sarah's coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips. St. Mary's? That's where I work. David's eyebrows rose slightly. Small world. Maybe we'll run into each other in the halls. Maybe, Sarah agreed, though she was thinking about how large St. Mary's actually was. With over 800 beds and dozens of departments, the chances of regularly encountering each other seemed slim unless they worked in related areas. What department? General surgery, with a focus on trauma cases. Now Sarah was definitely paying attention. The trauma unit was connected to the emergency department where she spent most of her shifts. If David was joining the surgical team, they would likely cross paths regularly during emergency cases. You'll like the trauma team there, she said. Dr. Williams runs a tight ship, but he's fair and really good at teaching. The nurses in that unit are fantastic too. Some of the best I've worked with. Good to know, David said, and Sarah noticed he was studying her face carefully. Any other insider advice for the new guy? The cafeteria coffee is terrible, but there's a cart on the second floor that sells decent espresso. The parking garage fills up by 7 a.m., so get there early or plan to walk 6 blocks. And never,
We
ever
have to
comment
act
on how
now.
quiet the night shift
The situation
is,
is
because
critical.
that's guaranteed to jinx everything, and you'll end up with back-to-back traumas until dawn. David laughed, a rich sound that made Sarah realize how much she enjoyed making him smile. Noted. Anything else? The vending machine on the 4th floor sometimes double delivers if you hit B4 twice really fast, but don't let maintenance catch you doing it. Are you encouraging me to steal snacks on my first week? I'm encouraging you to take advantage of happy accidents when they occur, Sarah corrected with mock seriousness. It's completely different. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, drinking their coffee and watching the morning light grow stronger outside the windows. Sarah found herself studying the room more carefully now that her initial disorientation had faded. The furniture was expensive, but not showy, chosen for quality and comfort rather than to impress. Medical journals were stacked neatly on the nightstand alongside what looked like a well-read copy of a mystery novel. A framed photograph on the dresser showed David with an older couple who shared his smile and dark eyes. Your parents? She asked, nodding toward the photo. David confirmed. They're both retired now, but they were both doctors. My mother was a pediatrician and my father was an internist. They met during their residencies and have been together for 35 years. That's beautiful, Sarah said, meaning it. Do they live nearby? About 2 hours north. Close enough for Sunday dinners, far enough away that they can't drop by unexpectedly to comment on my housekeeping skills. Smart planning. Sarah set down her empty mug and glanced around the room again. Though your housekeeping skills seem pretty solid from what I can see. I may have straightened up a bit after you fell asleep, David admitted. Old habit from living with roommates for so many years. Plus, my mother raised me to believe that a messy room reflects a messy mind. What does she think about your career choice? She's proud, I think, though she worries about the hours and the stress. She always said she hoped I'd find something that would let me have a life outside of work. But she also knows that surgery is what I've wanted since I was 12 years old. What happened when you were 12? David's expression grew more serious. My younger brother was in a car accident. Pretty bad one. The surgeon who worked on him was this incredibly calm, focused woman who took the time to explain everything to my parents and to me. She made what felt like the worst day of our lives feel manageable somehow. I remember thinking that if I could ever help families the way she helped ours, it would be worth all the years of training. Is your brother okay now? He's great. He's an engineer in Seattle, married with 2 kids. But that day definitely shaped my perspective on what medicine could be. Sarah felt a familiar tug in her chest, the same feeling she got when she connected with patients and their families during their most vulnerable moments. It was part of what had drawn her to emergency nursing in the first place, that opportunity to be present during critical moments and hopefully make them a little less frightening. That's a beautiful reason to choose surgery, she said softly. What about you? What made you choose nursing? Sarah considered her answer carefully. She had several go-to responses for this question, ranging from the practical to the inspirational, but something about David's openness made her want to be equally honest. I wanted to help people, which I know sounds generic, but it's true. I also wanted a career that would challenge me intellectually while still letting me work directly with patients. But honestly, I think what really sealed it was spending time with my grandmother when she was dying. The nurses who took care of her were incredible. They managed her pain, yes, but they also listened to her stories and held her hand when she was scared. They treated her like a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms. I wanted to be that for other people. How long ago did she pass? 5 years. She was 93 and lived independently until the last 6 months. She was this tiny woman who intimidated everyone, including the doctors. She had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have liked you too, Sarah said, then felt her cheeks warm slightly at the implication of intimacy in that statement. She always said you could tell a lot about a person by how they treat service workers and whether they tip well. I hope I passed that test last night. You left a 30% tip on a $60 tab and said thank you to the busser who refilled your water glass. So yes, you definitely passed. David smiled. Your grandmother taught you to pay attention. She taught me a lot of things, including the importance of making smart choices about who you spend time with. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than Sarah had intended. She found herself caught between the desire to stay in this warm, comfortable bubble of conversation and the practical voice in her head reminding her that she barely knew this man and had made a very impulsive decision the night before. I should probably get going, she said finally, though she made no move to actually get up. I have some errands to run before my shift tomorrow. Of course, David said, though he didn't seem eager for her to leave either. Can I give you a ride home? That's sweet, but I can call a car. It's not far. Are you sure? It's no trouble. Sarah considered the offer. The practical part of her brain pointed out that accepting would mean spending more time with David, which could complicate what had been intended as a simple one-night encounter. But the larger part of her brain, the part that had been enjoying their conversation immensely, was curious about what a car ride with him would be like. Actually, a ride would be great, she heard herself saying. If you're sure you don't mind. I wouldn't have offered if I minded. Sarah gathered her clothes from where they had been neatly folded on a chair, another small gesture that spoke well of David's character. She dressed quickly in the attached bathroom, noting the expensive toiletries and fluffy towels that reinforced her impression of someone who valued quality and comfort. When she emerged, David was waiting by the door with her purse and jacket. The ride to her apartment was filled with easy conversation about their respective neighborhoods, favorite restaurants, and shared observations about the city's quirks. David drove like someone who was naturally careful and considerate, checking his mirrors frequently and using his turn signals religiously even when traffic was light. This is me, Sarah said as they pulled up in front of her building, a converted warehouse that had been divided into affordable apartments for young professionals. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe and within her budget. Nice neighborhood, David said, and he seemed to mean it. Very convenient to the hospital district. That was definitely a factor in choosing it. Nothing worse than a long commute when you're working 12-hour shifts. They sat for a moment in the car, neither seeming quite ready to end their time together. Sarah felt the same reluctance she had experienced in his bedroom, that sense of wanting to extend a connection that felt surprisingly natural and comfortable. I had a really nice time last night. Sarah arrived at St. Mary's Medical Center at 6:15 Monday morning, her usual 15 minutes early to grab coffee and review patient charts before the morning briefing. The emergency department hummed with its typical pre-dawn energy, a mixture of overnight cases winding down and the day's shift preparing to take over. She badged into the break room, grabbed her favorite mug from her locker, and headed for the coffee station that she and her colleagues had pooled money to upgrade from the hospital's standard terrible brew. Morning, sunshine, called Marcus, one of the senior nurses who had become something of a mentor to Sarah during her residency. How was your weekend? You look unusually cheerful for a Monday morning. Good weekend, Sarah replied, pouring her coffee and adding a splash of the real cream they kept hidden in the back of the staff refrigerator. Jessica's birthday party was fun, and I actually got caught up on laundry and meal prep for once. Look at you, being a functional adult, teased Amanda, another nurse who was just finishing her night shift. Did you meet anyone interesting at the party? Sarah felt her cheeks warm slightly. Maybe. We're having dinner Friday. Ooh, mysterious, Marcus said. Doctor or civilian? Doctor, Sarah admitted. But not from here, so no awkward workplace dynamics to navigate. Smart girl, Amanda said. Hospital romances are complicated enough without adding coworker drama to the mix. Sarah nodded agreement, thinking about how relieved she was that David worked elsewhere. She had seen enough relationships between colleagues go sideways to appreciate the wisdom of keeping her personal and professional lives separate. Dating someone from another hospital meant they would understand the demands of medical careers without the complications of daily workplace interactions. All right, people, let's get this Monday started, called Dr. Jennifer Williams as she entered the break room. The emergency department chief was a woman in her early 50s who commanded respect through competence and fairness rather than intimidation. She had been Sarah's strongest advocate during some difficult early months of residency, when Sarah had struggled with the confidence to make quick decisions under pressure. Sarah, you're with me in Trauma Bay 2 this morning, Dr. Williams continued. We've got a busy day ahead, and I want you getting experience with the complex cases while you finish up your residency. Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied, feeling the familiar flutter of nervous excitement that came with trauma assignments. These were the cases that tested everything she had learned, requiring quick thinking and precise execution under intense pressure. And, heads up, everyone, Dr. Williams added. We have a new chief of surgery starting today. Dr. David Chun is joining us from Boston Medical, and he'll be working closely with our trauma team on emergency surgical cases. I want everyone to make him feel welcome and show him how we do things here at St. Mary's. Sarah's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, clattering against the counter and splashing hot coffee across her scrubs. The break room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her, concerned expressions replacing their earlier casual chatter. Sarah, you okay? Marcus asked, reaching for paper towels to help clean up the mess. I'm fine, Sarah managed, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. Just clumsy this morning. But she wasn't fine. Her heart was racing, and her mind was spinning as she tried to process what Dr. Williams had just said. David Chun, new chief of surgery, starting today at St. Mary's. The David who had made her coffee that morning and driven her home yesterday was not just any surgeon at any hospital. He was the new head of the department she worked most closely with, the person who would be overseeing surgical decisions for her patients and evaluating the emergency department's performance. You sure you're okay? Dr. Williams asked, studying Sarah's face with the sharp attention of someone trained to assess medical emergencies. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Sarah repeated, accepting the paper towels from Marcus and dabbing at her wet scrubs. Just need more coffee in my system, apparently. Dr. Williams didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded and continued with her morning briefing. Sarah tried to focus on the patient assignments and scheduling updates, but her mind kept returning to the implications of David's position. How had she not known? He had mentioned starting a new job, but she had assumed it was a lateral move or perhaps a position at one of the smaller hospitals in the area. The chief of surgery position at St. Mary's was a significant appointment, the kind of role that typically went to someone with extensive experience and an impressive track record. As the briefing ended and the team dispersed to their assigned areas, Sarah remained frozen by the coffee station, still holding the paper towels and trying to figure out how to navigate this unexpected complication. She and David were supposed to have dinner Friday. They had shared an intimate evening together, and now he was effectively her boss, someone who could influence her career trajectory and professional reputation. Sarah, let's go, Dr. Williams called from the doorway. Trauma Bay 2 needs us, and I want to review the overnight admits before the surgical teams arrive for morning rounds. Sarah forced herself to move, throwing away the paper towels and following Dr. Williams down the familiar hallway toward the trauma unit. The emergency department operated on a carefully orchestrated schedule, with nursing shifts overlapping with surgical rotations to ensure continuity of care. She had walked this route hundreds of times during her residency, but this morning everything felt different, charged with the possibility of encountering David at any moment. The trauma bay was organized chaos, as always. 3 patients occupied the beds, each connected to monitors and receiving different levels of care. Sarah immediately fell into her familiar rhythm, checking chart updates and conferring with the night shift nurse about patient status and pending orders. The routine helped calm her nerves and reminded her that, whatever personal complications she was facing, her primary responsibility was to her patients. Mrs. Chun in bed 1 is stable, but waiting for surgical consult about her gallbladder, reported Nancy, the night nurse. Mr. Rodriguez in bed 2 needs his dressing changed and pain management reassessment. And bed 3 is our motorcycle accident from last night, waiting for ortho to decide about surgery on that compound fracture. Sarah nodded, making notes and mentally organizing her priorities for the morning. Mrs. Chin's case was straightforward, but the surgical consult would likely come from David's department. Mr. Rodriguez was recovering from an emergency appendectomy performed by the night's surgical team. The motorcycle accident patient would require coordination between multiple specialties. I'll take Mrs. Chin first, Sarah decided. Has surgery been contacted about the consult? Should be coming down shortly, Nancy replied. New chief is supposed to be reviewing all pending surgical cases this morning. Sarah felt her stomach flutter again, but she pushed the feeling aside and focused on gathering supplies for Mrs. Chen's care. She was checking the elderly woman's vital signs when she heard familiar voices in the hallway outside the trauma bay. Her hands remained steady as she recorded blood pressure readings, but her entire nervous system seemed to shift into high alert. The patient in bed 1 has classic gallbladder symptoms, Dr. Williams was saying to someone just out of Sarah's sight. 72-year-old female, presented with upper right quadrant pain, nausea, and low-grade fever. Ultrasound confirmed gallstones, but no signs of acute inflammation yet. What's her surgical history? Came the reply, and Sarah's breath caught as she recognized David's voice. Previous cesarean section 25 years ago, no complications. Otherwise healthy. Takes medication for mild hypertension, but no other significant medical issues. Sarah kept her eyes focused on her patient, adjusting Mrs. Chin's blankets and checking the 4-line placement. But she could feel her pulse accelerating as the voices grew closer. She heard footsteps entering the trauma bay, followed by Dr. Williams's voice introducing the patient. Mrs. Chun, this is Dr. David Chun, our new chief of surgery. He's going to examine you and discuss your treatment options. Another Dr. Chun, the elderly woman said with a weak smile. Are we related? I don't think so, David replied warmly. But it's always nice to meet someone who shares your name. Sarah finally turned around, making eye contact with David for the first time since learning about his position. She watched his expression change as recognition dawned, saw the slight widening of his eyes, and the almost imperceptible pause in his movement. But his professional demeanor never wavered as he approached Mrs. Chin's bedside. Good morning, he said to Sarah, his tone carefully neutral and appropriately professional. I'm Dr. Chun. Could you give me an update on Mrs. Chin's status this morning? Good morning, Dr. Chun, Sarah replied, matching his formal tone though her heart was beating so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Mrs. Chin's vital signs are stable. Blood pressure is 135/80, temperature is 99.2, and she reports her pain level as a 4 out of 10 this morning, improved from the 7 she reported during admission. Has she been able to tolerate oral fluids? Small sips of water and ice chips, no nausea or vomiting overnight. Thank you, David said, then turned his attention to Mrs. Chun, beginning a gentle examination and asking questions about her symptoms. Sarah stepped back to give him space to work while remaining close enough to assist if needed. She watched him interact with his patient, noting the calm confidence he projected and the way he explained each step of his examination in terms Mrs. Chun could understand. His hands were gentle but thorough as he palpated her abdomen, and he took time to answer her questions about the surgical procedure he was recommending. The good news is that this can be done laparoscopic, David explained to Mrs. Chun. That means small incisions instead of one large one, which means faster healing time and less discomfort. The surgery itself takes about an hour, and most patients go home the same day or after one night in the hospital. Will it hurt? Mrs. Chin asked, the question that most patients wanted answered but were sometimes afraid to voice. You'll have some discomfort for a few days, but we have excellent pain management protocols to keep you comfortable. And Nurse Sarah here will make sure you have everything you need for a smooth recovery. Mrs. Chun turned to Sarah with a grateful smile. You've been so kind, dear, taking such good care of me. It's my pleasure, Mrs. Chun, Sarah replied sincerely. We want to make sure you're comfortable and that you understand everything that's happening. David completed his examination and stepped back, making notes on his tablet while Dr. Williams discussed scheduling with Mrs. Chun. Sarah busied herself organizing supplies, hyper-aware of David's presence in the room and the careful way they were both maintaining professional distance. I'd like to schedule her surgery for this afternoon, David told Dr. Williams. Her case is straightforward, and there's no benefit to waiting. Can we get her on the schedule for 2 o'clock? I'll coordinate with the Dr. Williams replied. Sarah, can you handle the pre-op prep and make sure Mrs. Chun understands the discharge instructions? Absolutely, Sarah confirmed. David nodded to both women, then turned to Mrs. Chun. I'll see you this afternoon, Mrs. Chun. If you have any questions before then, please ask Nurse Sarah or Dr. Williams, and they can contact me. Thank you, Doctor, Mrs. Chun said. I feel much better knowing what to expect. David left the trauma bay with Dr. Williams, their voices fading as they moved on to discuss other cases. Sarah remained with Mrs. Chun, completing her morning care routine while her mind raced with questions about how to handle this unexpected situation. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of patient care activities punctuated by brief encounters with David as he made rounds with various surgical cases. Each interaction was scrupulously professional, but Sarah was acutely aware of the undercurrent of tension between them. They had established an easy rapport during their personal time together, but now they had to navigate the complex dynamics of workplace hierarchy and professional boundaries. During her lunch break, Sarah found herself alone in the break room, staring at her sandwich without much appetite. She kept replaying the morning's encounters, analyzing David's behavior for clues about how he was processing this situation. He had been perfectly professional, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their personal connection was creating an underlying awkwardness that could become problematic if not addressed. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and her heart jumped when she saw David's name on the screen. I think we need to talk. Are you free after your shift today? Sarah stared at the message for several minutes before typing back, yes. Same coffee shop where we planned to meet Friday. Perfect. See you at 7. She put her phone away and tried to finish her lunch, but her appetite had completely disappeared. The afternoon stretched ahead of her with Mrs. Chen's surgery and several other complex cases, but she found it difficult to concentrate on anything except the conversation she would have with David in a few hours. Mrs. Chen's surgery went smoothly, with David performing the laparoscopic procedure with the skill and precision Sarah had expected after learning about his credentials. She assisted with pre-op preparation and was present when Mrs. Chun was wheeled to recovery, still groggy but smiling when David confirmed that everything had gone perfectly. Thank you both for taking such good care of me, Mrs. Chun said, squeezing Sarah's hand weakly. You make a good team. Sarah felt her cheeks burn at the innocent comment, but David simply smiled and assured Mrs. Chun that her recovery should be straightforward. They walked together toward the elevator bank, the first time they had been alone since the morning's revelation. She's right. You know, David said quietly as they waited for the elevator. You do excellent work. Your patient care is exceptional. Thank you, Sarah replied, unsure how to respond to professional praise from someone who had seen her in a very different context just 2 days earlier. The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside with 2 other hospital employees, making private conversation impossible. But as the doors closed and they began their descent, Sarah caught David's reflection in the polished steel doors and saw him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. The rest of her shift passed quickly, filled with the usual end-of-day activities and patient transitions to evening care. By 7 o'clock, Sarah had changed out of her scrubs and was walking toward the coffee shop, her stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation about the conversation ahead. She arrived first and chose a table in the back corner, away from the main flow of customers, but with a clear view of the entrance. When David walked in 10 minutes later, still wearing his hospital attire but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, She felt the same flutter of attraction she had experienced when first meeting him at Jessica's party. The professional context couldn't entirely erase the memory of their personal connection, and she realized that managing this situation was going to be more complicated than she had hoped. David spotted her immediately and approached the table with 2 cups of coffee, apparently having remembered her preference from their morning together. He set 1 cup in front of her and took the seat across the small table, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Well," he said after a moment of silence, "this is definitely not how I expected my first day to go. I think we need to figure out how to handle this," Sarah replied, grateful that he had opened the conversation directly rather than dancing around the obvious issues. "I agree. But first, I want you to know that discovering you work at St. Mary's doesn't change anything about how I feel about our time together. I had a wonderful evening with you, and I was looking forward to getting to know you better." Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I feel the same way. But this complicates things significantly." "It does," David acknowledged. "I'm your supervisor now, which creates potential conflicts of interest and puts both of our professional reputations at risk if we're not careful about how we proceed." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. David was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup before meeting her eyes again. "I think we need to put our personal relationship on hold until you finish your residency, and hopefully move into a permanent position where I won't be directly supervising your work." Sarah had expected this response, but hearing it still created a sharp pang of disappointment. "That's probably the smart thing to do." "It is. But that doesn't mean it's easy." "No," Sarah agreed. "It's not easy at all." They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the implications of David's decision. Sarah understood the logic and even appreciated his willingness to prioritize their professional responsibilities, but she couldn't help feeling frustrated by the timing of everything. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. Why didn't you mention that you were coming to St. Mary's as chief of surgery? That seems like the kind of detail that might have come up during conversation." David's expression grew slightly rueful. "Honestly, I was enjoying being just David for an evening, rather than Dr. Chun with all the expectations and assumptions that come with that title. When you're in a leadership position, people often treat you differently, and I was savoring the opportunity to connect with someone who didn't know about any of that." Sarah nodded, understanding the sentiment completely. "I get that. I sometimes don't mention being in medical school when I meet people outside of work because it changes how they interact with me." "Exactly. But I should have been more forthcoming once I realized you worked in medicine. That was unfair to both of us. And I should have asked more specific questions instead of making assumptions about where you worked. So we both could have handled things differently," David concluded. "But dwelling on that doesn't solve our current situation." "No, it doesn't." Sarah took a sip of her coffee, buying time to organize her thoughts. "How do we handle things at work? Do we pretend we don't know each other outside of professional contexts?" "I think we need to be scrupulously professional in all workplace interactions," David said. "No special treatment, positive or negative. I evaluate your work based solely on your performance, and you treat me the same way you would treat any other department head. That seems reasonable. And if other people notice any awkwardness, we're both adults who can maintain professional boundaries regardless of our personal feelings. Anyone who works in a hospital understands that complex social dynamics are part of the environment." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced it would be as simple as David made it sound. Hospital staff were notorious for picking up on interpersonal undercurrents, and she suspected that their careful professionalism might actually make them more noticeable rather than less. "What about after my residency?" she asked. "Assuming I get offered a permanent position here, would that change the reporting structure enough to make a personal relationship possible?" "It might," David said carefully. "Staff nurses don't report directly to the surgery department, so the conflict of interest would be significantly reduced. But we'd still need to be careful about appearances and make sure our personal relationship never influenced professional decisions. So there's hope for the future, but not for the immediate present. That's how I see it. Unless you disagree with my assessment." Sarah considered his words carefully. The logical part of her brain agreed completely with everything David had said. Hospital politics could be brutal, and any hint of impropriety could damage both of their reputations and career prospects. But the emotional part of her brain was disappointed by the prospect of putting their connection on hold just when it had started to develop into something promising. "I think you're right," she said finally. "I don't like it, but I think you're right." "I don't like it either," David admitted. "But I've seen too many promising careers derailed by poor judgment about workplace relationships. I won't let that happen to either of us." They finished their coffee in relative silence, both lost in thought about the implications of their decision. As they prepared to leave, David reached across the table and briefly touched Sarah's hand. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you're going to be an excellent nurse, and I look forward to working with you professionally until we can explore other possibilities." "Thank you," Sarah replied, feeling a complex mixture. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah and David's coffee shop conversation, and their carefully maintained professional relationship had settled into a rhythm that was both comfortable and frustrating. They interacted regularly during surgical consults and emergency cases, always maintaining appropriate boundaries while working together with an efficiency that other staff members had begun to notice and comment upon favorably. Sarah had thrown herself into her final weeks of residency with renewed focus, determined to prove that her professional capabilities were completely separate from her personal feelings. She arrived early, stayed late when needed, and volunteered for the most challenging cases. Her evaluations remained excellent, and Dr. Williams had hinted more than once that a permanent position offer was likely forthcoming. But maintaining emotional distance from David was proving more difficult than Sarah had anticipated. Every interaction reminded her of their brief but intense connection, and she found herself paying attention to details about him that had nothing to do with work. The way he unconsciously adjusted his tie when he was thinking through a complex case. How he always thanked the surgical technicians by name after procedures. The fact that he kept a small photo of his family tucked into the corner of his office bulletin board. It was during the 4th week that everything changed. Sarah was working a particularly busy Thursday evening shift when the call came in. Multiple vehicle accident on the interstate, several trauma patients incoming by helicopter and ambulance. The entire emergency department shifted into high alert mode, with all available staff preparing for what was likely to be a long and challenging night. "We've got 4 incoming," Dr. Williams announced to the assembled team. 2 critical, 1 serious, 1 minor. ETA on the helicopter is 8 minutes. Ambulance patients arrive in 15. "Sarah, you're with me on the critical cases. Marcus, take Trauma Bay 3 for the serious case. Everyone else, prepare for overflow and family management." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with major trauma situations. These were the cases that tested everything she had learned during her residency, requiring split-second decisions and flawless execution under pressure. She quickly gathered supplies and checked equipment while mentally reviewing trauma protocols and emergency procedures. The helicopter arrived first, its rotors creating a whirlwind of noise and activity on the hospital's landing pad. Sarah ran alongside the gurney as paramedics provided report on their patient, a 35-year-old male who had been trapped in his vehicle for almost an hour before rescue crews could extract him. Possible internal bleeding, definite compound fracture of the left femur, head injury with intermittent loss of consciousness, the paramedic reported as they rushed toward Trauma Bay 1. Blood pressure has been dropping steadily during transport despite fluid resuscitation. Sarah immediately began assessing the patient while Dr. Williams performed her initial examination. The man was conscious but clearly in shock, his skin pale and clammy despite the warm blankets the paramedics had applied. His left leg was clearly deformed, with bone visible through torn flesh and clothing. "We need surgery. Consult immediately," Dr. Williams said, not looking up from her examination. "Probable internal abdominal bleeding plus the orthopedic trauma. Page Dr. Chun and Dr. Martinez from Ortho, Stat." Sarah continued her assessment while coordinating with the lab technician for emergency blood work and type An cross-match for potential transfusion. The patient's blood pressure continued to drop despite aggressive fluid replacement, confirming Dr. Williams's suspicion of significant internal bleeding. David arrived within 5 minutes of being paged, immediately gowning and moving to the bedside for his evaluation. Sarah provided him with a rapid summary of the patient's status and her assessment findings, noting the deterioration in vital signs since arrival. Abdomen is rigid and distended, David observed, his hands gentle but thorough as he examined the patient. Probable splenic laceration, possibly liver involvement as well. We need to get him to the OR immediately. Ortho is on the way for the leg, Dr. Williams reported. Can you take him up now, or do you need them to stabilize the fracture first? The internal bleeding is the priority, David decided. We can coordinate with ortho in the surgical suite, but this can't wait. The next 20 minutes were a blur of rapid preparation and coordination between multiple departments. Sarah found herself working in perfect synchronization with David, anticipating his needs and providing information without being asked. Their personal history seemed to enhance rather than complicate their professional partnership, creating an intuitive understanding that made their teamwork exceptionally efficient. Sarah, I want you to scrub in with me, David said as they prepared to transport the patient to surgery. Your assessment skills have been excellent throughout this case, and I could use your expertise in the OR. Sarah felt a moment of surprise. It was unusual for emergency department nurses to scrub in for surgery unless they were specifically trained surgical nurses, but she had completed several surgical rotations during her training and was qualified to assist in emergency situations. Dr. Williams? Sarah asked, looking for confirmation from her immediate supervisor. Go, Dr. Williams said without hesitation. You know this case better than anyone, and Dr. Chun is right about your assessment skills. As they moved toward the elevator, Sarah became aware that several staff members were watching their interaction with interest. She and David had been so focused on patient care that they had fallen into their natural rhythm of communication, finishing each other's sentences and working together with an ease that suggested familiarity beyond normal professional relationships. In the surgical suite, Sarah found herself in the unique position of being the only person present who had witnessed both David's personal and professional personas. She watched him transform into the focused, decisive surgeon she had heard about from other staff members. But she also noticed the small gestures of consideration he showed to the surgical team and the way he explained his decisions clearly for the benefit of the residents observing the procedure. The surgery was complex and challenging, requiring repair of a lacerated spleen and liver damage while coordinating with the orthopedic team for stabilization of the patient's leg fracture. Sarah assisted with tissue retraction and suction, monitoring the patient's vital signs while providing David with instruments and supplies as needed. Excellent work, David murmured to her at one point when she anticipated his need for a specific type of suture before he asked for it. Your timing is perfect. Sarah felt a flush of pride at the professional praise, but also an undercurrent of awareness about the personal connection that made their teamwork so seamless. They moved around each other in the confined space of the operating room with an ease that spoke of intuitive understanding, and she found herself hyper-aware of the moments when their hands brushed as she passed instruments or when he leaned close to point out anatomical landmarks. The surgery lasted almost 4 hours, but the patient's vital signs stabilized once the internal bleeding was controlled, and the orthopedic repairs proceeded without complications. By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight, and the emergency department had quieted to its typical overnight pace. Outstanding work tonight, David told the surgical team as they completed their post-operative notes. That was a challenging case, and everyone performed exceptionally well. As the team dispersed, Sarah found herself alone with David in the surgical suite, both of them tired but energized by the successful outcome of their patient's care. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced by the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing they had likely saved someone's life. You were incredible in there, David said quietly, his voice filled with genuine admiration. I've worked with a lot of surgical nurses over the years, and your instincts are as good as any I've encountered. Thank you, Sarah replied, feeling the warmth of his praise settle into her chest. It felt good to be part of something like that. Emergency nursing is rewarding, but there's something special about being present for the entire process of putting someone back together. Have you ever considered surgical nursing as a specialty? Sometimes, Sarah admitted. But I love the variety and unpredictability of emergency medicine. Every shift is different, and you never know what kind of case is going to come through the doors. Those are good reasons to stay in emergency care, David agreed. But you should know that you'd be welcome in surgery anytime if you ever want to cross-train or pick up additional shifts. They began removing their surgical gowns and disposing of used equipment, their movements slower now that the urgency of patient care had passed. Sarah found herself stealing glances at David, noting the way his hair was slightly mussed from wearing a surgical cap for hours and the tired satisfaction in his expression. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they walked toward the elevator bank. "Of course. Earlier tonight, when we were working together, it felt like we fell back into the easy communication we had that first morning at your apartment. Are you concerned that people noticed?" David was quiet for a moment, considering her question as they waited for the elevator. "I noticed it too," he said finally. "And, yes, I'm aware that our teamwork probably looked more intuitive than it should have given our limited professional history. Are you worried about people talking?" "I'm more concerned about whether we're maintaining appropriate boundaries," David replied honestly. "Tonight felt natural and effective from a patient care perspective, but I'm not sure we successfully kept our personal history separate from our professional interaction." The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside, the confined space suddenly feeling more intimate than it had any right to. Sarah found herself studying David's reflection in the polished steel doors, noting the slight tension in his shoulders and the way he was carefully not looking directly at her. "Do you think we made a mistake?" she asked quietly. "About tonight? No. We provided excellent patient care, and that's what matters most. About maintaining boundaries in general? I'm not sure anymore." The elevator reached the ground floor, and they stepped out into the nearly deserted main corridor of the hospital. Most of the administrative staff had long since gone home, leaving only essential personnel and the quiet hum of overnight operations. "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. David stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious but conflicted. "It means that pretending we don't have a personal connection isn't working as well as I hoped it would. It also means that our professional partnership is exceptional, and I'm questioning whether our original decision to put everything on hold was the right one." Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate. "Are you saying you want to reconsider our arrangement?" "I'm saying that I'm finding it increasingly difficult to ignore the fact that we work together better than I work with anyone else, and that ignoring our personal chemistry isn't making it go away." They stood in the hallway, facing each other with several feet of space between them, but connected by intention that felt almost tangible. Sarah could hear the distant sounds of the hospital around them, the beeping of monitors and quiet conversations at nursing stations, but everything felt muted compared to the intensity of the moment. "David," she said softly, and she saw him react to the sound of his first name spoken in her voice for the first time in weeks. "I know we agreed to wait," he continued, his voice low and careful. "And I know all the logical reasons why that's still the smart thing to do. But logic isn't accounting for how I feel when we work together, or how much I've missed talking to you outside of professional contexts." "I've missed it too," Sarah admitted. "More than I expected to. So what do we do? Keep pretending that we're just colleagues who happen to work well together? Or acknowledge that there's something here worth exploring despite the complications?" Sarah looked at David's face, seeing the same conflict she was feeling reflected in his expression. The smart, safe choice was to maintain their professional boundaries until her residency ended and the power dynamic between them shifted. But the connection they shared was rare and valuable, and the prospect of continuing to ignore it for another 2 months felt increasingly artificial and difficult. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I know that tonight reminded me of why I was attracted to you in the first place. And not just physically. The way you handle pressure, how you treat your team, your absolute focus on patient care even when everything is chaotic. Those aren't things I can just turn off awareness of. And I can't ignore how perfectly we complement each other professionally, or how much I enjoy your perspective on cases and patient care," David replied. "You make me a better surgeon, Sarah. And that has nothing to do with our personal history and everything to do with who you are as a nurse and as a person." They stood in silence for several moments. both processing the implications of what they had just acknowledged. The carefully maintained boundaries they had established were proving insufficient to contain their connection, and they both knew that continuing to pretend otherwise was becoming unsustainable. "So what do we do?" Sarah asked finally. "I think we need to be honest about what this is," David said. "We're two people who are attracted to each other personally, and who work exceptionally well together professionally. We can continue trying to suppress both of those things, or we can find a way to manage them responsibly. What would that look like? I don't know exactly, but I know that completely avoiding each other isn't working, and neither is pretending that we don't have chemistry. Maybe we need to find a middle ground." Sarah considered his words carefully. "What kind of middle ground?" "We could continue maintaining professional boundaries at work while allowing ourselves to develop our personal relationship outside of the hospital. No special treatment in professional contexts, but no artificial restrictions on our personal time." "That would be complicated," Sarah pointed out. "Yes, it would, but not more complicated than what we're doing now, which isn't really working for either of us." Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. The prospect of being able to spend time with David outside of work was appealing, but she was also concerned about their ability to maintain appropriate boundaries if their personal relationship continued to develop. "What about hospital politics?" she asked. "People are already starting to notice how well we work together." "Let them notice," David said with quiet confidence. "Good teamwork between departments is something to be celebrated, not hidden. As long as we maintain professional standards and never let personal feelings interfere with patient care or workplace decisions, there's nothing inappropriate about being effective colleagues. And if our personal relationship becomes more serious, then we'll deal with that situation when it arises," David replied. "But we're both adults who are capable of maintaining professional boundaries regardless of our personal feelings." Sarah studied his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or hesitation. But she saw only the same quiet confidence that had first attracted her to him. He wasn't proposing anything reckless or impulsive, just an honest acknowledgement of what already existed between them and a mature approach to managing the complications. "All right," she said finally, "but with some conditions." "Name them." "First, if either of us feels like our personal relationship is affecting our professional judgment, we address it immediately and honestly. Second, we're scrupulously careful about how we interact at work, no matter how comfortable we become with each other personally. And third, if anyone in hospital administration raises concerns about our relationship, we're prepared to be completely transparent about our approach." "Agreed on all counts," David said without hesitation. "And one more thing," Sarah added. "We take this slowly. I don't want to rush into something just because we have good chemistry and work well together." "Also agreed. Though I should mention that taking things slowly doesn't mean I'm not interested in having dinner with you Friday night, if you're still available." Sarah felt herself smile for the first time since their conversation had begun. "I'm still available. Same restaurant. Same restaurant. 7 o'clock. Perfect." They walked together toward the parking garage, their conversation shifting to lighter topics and observations about their patient's successful surgery. The tension that had characterized their interactions for the past 3 weeks had eased, replaced by a comfortable anticipation of possibilities ahead. As they reached Sarah's car, David paused and looked at her with an expression that combined professional respect with personal affection. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "For your excellent patient care, for your honesty about our situation, and for being willing to figure this out with me. Thank you for trusting me enough to scrub in with you, and for being someone worth figuring things out with." David smiled, the same warm expression Sarah remembered from their first morning together. "I'll see you tomorrow, Nurse Sarah." "See you tomorrow, Dr. Chun." As Sarah drove home through the quiet city streets, she reflected on how much had changed in the span of a single shift. The careful boundaries she and David had maintained were evolving into something more flexible and honest, acknowledging both their professional partnership and their personal attraction. It felt like a more sustainable approach than the artificial distance they had been maintaining, though she knew the coming weeks would test their ability to balance both aspects of their relationship. But for the first time since David's first day at St. Mary's, Sarah felt optimistic about their future together, both as colleagues and as something more. The connection that had started with a chance meeting at a birthday party had survived the complications of workplace dynamics and was emerging stronger and more honest than before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was confident that they could meet them together with the same teamwork and communication that had made them such effective partners in the operating room. Of gratitude and regret. I'll see you tomorrow, Dr. Chun. See you tomorrow, Nurse Sarah. As they parted ways outside the coffee shop, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a single day. The promising beginning of a personal relationship had transformed into a professional challenge that would test both her emotional maturity and her ability to maintain boundaries in a complex workplace environment. But, as she walked to her car, she found herself oddly optimistic about the future, even if it would require more patience than she had originally planned. She said finally, "And this morning, thank you for the coffee and the ride. Thank you for interesting conversation and for making me laugh more than I have in weeks." Sarah opened the car door, then paused. "I know this might sound forward, but would you like to get dinner sometime? Somewhere with actual food and proper lighting where we can continue talking like normal people." David's smile was immediate and genuine. "I would like that very much. Are you free Friday evening?" "I am. Do you know Romano's on 5th Street? It's nothing fancy, but the food is excellent and it's quiet enough for conversation." "Perfect. 7 o'clock. 7 is great." Sarah got out of the car and walked to her building entrance, turning to wave as David pulled away from the curb. As she climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, she found herself smiling and feeling lighter than she had in months. Whatever had started between them the night before felt like it had the potential to become something meaningful, and that possibility filled her with a combination of excitement and nervous anticipation. She spent the rest of the day catching up on laundry and meal prep for the upcoming week, but found her thoughts frequently returning to her conversation with David. There had been something about the way he listened, really listened, that made her feel heard in a way she hadn't experienced with anyone else she had dated. He asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers, rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. By Sunday evening, Sarah was looking forward to both their dinner date and the start of another week at the hospital. She had no way of knowing that Monday morning would bring a surprise that would complicate everything she thought she understood about her encounter with David, or that their paths were about to intersect in ways that would challenge both of their professional and personal boundaries in unexpected ways.